My parents exiled me at 12 for a crime I never committed. 14 years later, I know who did it. I know this is long, but I need to get this off my chest, because 3 days ago a woman I hadn't spoken to in 16 years called me crying. And by the end of that phone call, I found out my entire childhood was a lie somebody else wrote for me. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that, when I was 12 years old, my parents put me on a plane to a boarding school in another state and told me not to come back until I learned some respect. I spent the next 6 years of my life being raised by strangers, coming home for exactly 0 holidays because home didn't want me. And the whole time I thought it was my fault. I thought I was the problem. I wasn't. 3 days ago my phone rang at 11 p.m. It was a number I didn't recognize, and normally I let those go to voicemail. Something made me pick up. Is this, oh God, is this really you? It's Rosa, Rosa Delgado. I was your nanny. Before everything. I hadn't heard that name in 16 years, but my whole body went cold like it was still 2010 and I was still that kid. Rosa, I said. Why are you calling me? And she said, because I'm 68 years old and I have a bad heart, and I am not going to die with this sitting in my chest anymore. You need to know what your stepmother did to you. I want to back up. I want you to understand exactly who I was before that suitcase, and exactly what got taken from me, because it's going to make what Rosa told me hit a lot harder. My mom died when I was 7. Ovarian cancer, fast and ugly, the kind that takes someone in 11 months and leaves a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old standing at a funeral, not really understanding what forever means yet. My dad, Michael, was a good man before grief hollowed him out. He worked in commercial real estate, made good money, and after my mom passed, he basically stopped being a person for about a year. He'd come home, sit in the den, and stare at nothing. Rosa was the one who actually raised me and my little brother, Dominic, during that stretch. She cooked, she did homework with us. She was the one who showed up to my 4th grade choir concert because my dad forgot. I loved her more than almost anyone. Then when I was 9, my dad met Vanessa. Vanessa was polished in a way my mom never cared to be, always dressed like she was about to be photographed, always smiling with her mouth but not her eyes when Dominic or I were in the room. She and my dad got married fast, less than a year after they met, and I understand now that grief makes people vulnerable to exactly the wrong kind of person. Vanessa didn't marry my dad. She married his house, his money, and the idea of a family she could rearrange to suit her. She had a daughter of her own from a previous relationship, Chloe, 2 years younger than me. And from the day Vanessa moved in, it was obvious, to me, to Dominic, to Rosa, to anyone paying attention, that Chloe was going to be the daughter of the house. And Dominic and I were going to be the leftovers from a marriage Vanessa hadn't been part of. It started small, the way these things always do. New school clothes for Chloe every season. Dominic and I wore hand-me-downs from cousins. Chloe got to stay up late. We had a 8 p.m. lights out that Vanessa enforced like a prison warden. If Chloe broke something, it was an accident. If I so much as raised my voice, Vanessa would get this look. I called it her camera face, calm and sweet, and say in front of my dad, "It's okay, sweetheart, I know you're still adjusting. It must be hard missing your mom." She'd say it like comfort. It always landed like a knife. Because what she was really doing was reminding my dad, every single time, that I was the difficult one, the sad one, the one who couldn't adjust. By the time I was 11, Vanessa had my dad half convinced I had behavioral problems. I got blamed for things I didn't do constantly. A broken vase, a lie about homework, money missing from her purse once that I later found out Chloe had actually taken for the school book fair. Every single time I was guilty until proven innocent, and Vanessa made sure proven innocent never quite happened. My dad started looking at me like he was waiting for the next incident instead of like I was his daughter. Rosa saw all of it. She used to pull me aside in the kitchen and say, "Mija, that woman is building a case against you. I don't know for what yet, but she's building it." I didn't understand what she meant. I was 11. I thought Rosa was just being dramatic. She wasn't being dramatic. She was the only adult in that house who was paying attention. The week everything fell apart, Vanessa's mother had passed and left her an antique bracelet, emerald, in a gold setting, apparently worth close to $40,000. Vanessa kept it in a locked jewelry box in her closet and talked about it constantly, like it was a museum piece. She wore it exactly twice. 10 days after her mother's funeral, the bracelet was gone. Vanessa did not call the police first. She called my father into their bedroom, and I remember standing in the hallway because I'd heard the commotion, and I heard her say, clear as anything, I think we both know who would do something like this. I was 12 years old. I had never once been in her jewelry box. I didn't even know exactly where she kept the key. But that afternoon, my father searched my room. And in the bottom of my backpack, wrapped in a sock, was the bracelet. I did not put it there. I want to be as clear about that as I possibly can, 16 years later with nothing left to gain by lying about it. I did not take that bracelet. I remember standing in my room watching my father unwrap that sock with his hands shaking, and the look on his face wasn't anger. It was worse than anger. It was disappointment, and something that looked like relief, like some part of him had been waiting for proof that I was the problem, so he wouldn't have to examine anything else about our house. I screamed that I didn't do it. I cried so hard I threw up that night. Dominic, who was 10, stood in the doorway of my room white-faced, and even he, a 10-year-old, said, "Dad, she wouldn't do that." Nobody listened to him either. Vanessa didn't call the police. She was, in her words, trying to protect me. What she did instead was tell my father that a child capable of something like this needed structure I clearly wasn't getting at home. She had already, I found out much later, researched a boarding school 2 states away. A strict one, the kind with a behavioral program. The kind that markets itself to parents of troubled teens. She had the brochure printed before the bracelet even went missing. 2 weeks later, my father drove me to the airport himself. He hugged me at the gate and he said, "This is for your own good. We just need you to get some help." I remember asking him, begging him, "Dad, please, I didn't do it, please believe me," and he just kept saying, "We'll talk when you've had time to think about what you did." I was 12 years old, and I was carrying a suitcase my stepmother packed for me onto a plane by myself. To a school for kids my own father had decided were troubled because of a piece of jewelry I had never touched in my life. I want you to understand what those years actually looked like, because sent to boarding school sounds almost quaint when you say it fast, like summer camp with homework. It wasn't that. It was a school built around the idea that the kids sent there were the problem, so every counselor, every staff member, treated you like a project to be corrected rather than a person to be understood. I spent my first year there insisting I was innocent to anyone who'd listen, and I watched, in real time, how that story ages a kid out of being believed. After a while, the counselors started treating my insistence itself as a symptom. "She's still in denial," one wrote in a report I saw years later. Denial of a theft I never committed. My dad called maybe once a month, always short, always distant. Vanessa never called at all. Dominic wrote me letters for the first year, actual paper letters, because the school restricted phone use, and then even those slowed down. Because Vanessa made sure Dominic understood that bringing me up made everyone upset. I didn't come home for that first Christmas. Or the one after. By the 3rd year, I'd stopped expecting to. I turned 13, then 14, then 15 in a building full of strangers, marking birthdays with a school counselor's obligatory cupcake instead of my family. I missed my brother's middle school graduation. I missed knowing what my own house looked like as it changed year by year without me in it. The worst part wasn't even the school. It was what it does to you internally over years, to be told by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally that you did something monstrous, and to eventually run out of the energy to keep fighting a story nobody wants to hear you deny. Somewhere around 15, I stopped saying I didn't do it. Not because I'd forgiven anyone, but because I was exhausted and some small, poisoned part of me had started to wonder if maybe I really was just a bad kid who didn't remember doing a bad thing. That is what a lie, told long enough by the people who raised you, will do to a child's sense of their own memory. I aged out of the program at 18 with a diploma, a suitcase, and nowhere I particularly wanted to go. I did not go home. My dad offered weekly over the phone, and I said no, and some part of him sounded relieved that I'd said it instead of him having to. I moved in with an aunt on my mom's side for 2 years, put myself through community college, then a state school on loans and 2 jobs. I built a whole adult life, a career in logistics, an apartment, a handful of real friends completely separate from that house. I spoke to my dad maybe twice a year, stiff, surface-level calls. I never once spoke to Vanessa again. I met Chloe exactly one time as an adult at a cousin's wedding, and she looked at me like I was a stranger, because to her I basically was. I built my whole personality, honestly, around not needing them. I told myself I'd made peace with it. I hadn't. You don't make peace with something you were never allowed to actually understand. You just get tired of bleeding out loud, so you learn to do it quietly instead. Which brings me back to that phone call 3 nights ago. Rosa had stayed in touch with a family friend who still worked as a housekeeper for Vanessa. My dad passed away 2 years ago, by the way, heart attack. And I found out through a cousin's Facebook post 4 days after the funeral, because nobody in that house thought to call me. Rosa said that after my dad died, this housekeeper found something going through old storage boxes in the garage that Vanessa had asked her to clear out. A folder of my dad's, receipts, notes, and a handwritten letter Vanessa had never sent, from around the time I was sent away. Rosa read parts of it to me over the phone, her voice shaking. In the letter addressed to a sister of hers, Vanessa wrote about how the girls, meaning me and Chloe, were becoming a problem, how my dad was still too soft on his own kids, and how she needed something concrete, so he'd finally listen to her about needing space from his first family. She wrote, and Rosa read this part twice because she could hardly get through it, that she'd taken the bracelet to a consignment shop weeks before it ever went missing, had photos taken of it for insurance purposes, and planned to plant it somewhere obvious once the timing was right because, her words, he needs proof, not just my opinion, to actually act. She staged the theft of her own mother's bracelet. She planned it before I was ever accused. It wasn't a moment of jealousy that spiraled out of control. It was a calculated plan, on paper, with a timeline to remove me from that house permanently. Because I was a daily reminder that my father had a life and a family before her. And because this is the part that actually broke something in my chest, with me and eventually Dominic out of the picture. Everything my father owned would functionally flow toward her, and Chloe instead of being split 3 ways. It was never about a bracelet. It was never even really about me. I was collateral in a plan to secure an inheritance. Rosa said she'd known pieces of this for years. She'd overheard Vanessa on the phone once, right after I left, saying something like 1 down, but she had no proof. No way to make anyone believe her over a grown woman with a story already locked into place, and she'd spent 16 years hating herself for not finding a way to stop it. I drove to Rosa's apartment the next morning and read the letter myself. My dad's handwriting was on some of the surrounding notes, receipts he'd filed, a line where he'd written, V says B. Found in E's bag, will discuss when calmer, meaning he knew, at some point close to right after it happened, that something didn't add up. And he chose the version of events that let him stay married instead of the version that meant admitting he'd exiled his own daughter for nothing. I won't pretend this story ends with some big, satisfying courtroom moment, because it doesn't. My dad is dead. I can't confront him, and honestly, some nights I think that's worse than if he were still alive, because I'll never get to watch his face when he understands what he did. Vanessa is still alive, still living in that same house, and I did call her. I told her I'd read the letter. Her response, verbatim, was, I don't know what you think you have, but I raised you kids when nobody else wanted to. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize either. She just recalculated in real time how much damage I could actually do to her at this point, and correctly concluded, not much legally. 16 years is a long time. Statutes of limitations exist. My dad's estate was already split the way it was split when he died, mostly to her and Chloe, because he never updated anything after the divorce he and Vanessa never actually went through with. I confronted Dominic too, who's 24 now. He cried on the phone. He said he'd suspected for years, but was scared that saying anything out loud would blow up the only family he had left. I don't blame him. He was 10 years old when this happened to me. He was a kid trying to survive the same house I got exiled from. Here's the truth, and I promised myself I'd be honest instead of tying a bow on this for views. I don't get my childhood back. I don't get the years at that school back, or the birthdays, or the version of my relationship with my dad, where he actually stood up for me instead of choosing peace with his new wife over the truth about his own daughter. Rosa's confession gave me something important, proof that I was never crazy, never a thief. Never the problem, but proof 16 years too late doesn't undo what 6 years in exile does to a 12-year-old's understanding of whether she's loved. I'm not going to sue anybody. I'm not going to show up at Vanessa's door for a dramatic confrontation. What I am going to do is finally stop performing fine for people who never earned my forgiveness, and let myself actually grieve the dad I lost twice, once to Vanessa and once for real, without ever getting the conversation I needed. Update 6 weeks later. I want to add this because a lot of you will ask. Rosa is doing okay. Her heart condition is stable for now, and she's the only person from that entire chapter of my life I still talk to weekly. I sent her flowers and a letter telling her that as far as I'm concerned, she was my real parent during the years that mattered. Dominic and I have started rebuilding something. He came to visit me 2 weekends ago. The first time we'd spent real time together as adults. No supervision, no Vanessa in the next room deciding what we were allowed to feel. We didn't fix 16 years in one weekend. But we sat on my balcony until 2 a.m. going through old memories neither of us had said out loud before. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the only person who remembered what actually happened in that house. I have not spoken to Vanessa again, and I don't plan to. Chloe reached out once, a short message saying she always felt something was off, but didn't know how to say anything as a kid. I believe her. She was a kid, too. I told her the door's open if she ever wants to actually talk about it. Honestly, not just acknowledge it happened. I'm not writing this for sympathy, and I'm definitely not writing it for closure. Because I don't think closure is really a real thing when the person who owes it to you is gone before you get the chance to ask for it. I'm writing it because somewhere out there, some kid is currently living in a house where an adult is quietly building a case against them for something they didn't do, and I need that kid to know. It is not your fault, it was never your fault, and one day the truth catches up, even when it's too late to fix what it broke.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more fascinating Reddit tales, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to Archives of Reddit. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.